I would like to start with good news, since the counteroffensive has been scoring points lately, one after the other. The latest breakthrough is the definitive ban on puberty blockers in the English National Health Service. Last month, the NHS committed to stop medicalizing minors suffering from gender dysphoria. Yes, it's a decision taken on the grounds that puberty blockers disrupt the physical and brain development of the child, and that there is no evidence to support this clinical practice. The dark age is over in England, which is fantastic news, but let's face it, it's long overdue. Using experimental medicine on distressed children cannot be right. By contrast, in the United States, the trans issue is still brandished as a political device by the Biden administration. But there too, a major scoop hit the news. On March 4th, Environmental Progress, which is Michael Schellenberger's think tank, published leaked files from the WPATH. WPATH is the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. It was, until now, viewed as the leading authority on gender medicine. But the files prove that its guidance, which was translated into 18 languages and followed around the world, well, this guidance is led by trans ideology rather than science or ethical rationale. Leaked videos and emails reveal widespread medical practice. WPATH promotes surgical and hormone treatments and turns a blind eye on gruesome side effects from infertility to cancer. Thus, in America too, the transgender establishment is now under extreme pressure. On another front, last June 2023, there was this critical decision from the Supreme Court of the United States striking down race-based quotas in college admissions. This huge win brings an end to a 40 years judicial battle against affirmative action. And it will no doubt trigger the dismantling of the diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracy way beyond the academic world. That's another win. Now, freedom of speech has found its champion, not only Paul Coleman, that we saluted earlier. It has found its champion in the Free Speech Union. This British organization, founded by Toby Young, can claim repeated legal victories. Launched 4 years ago, in February 2020, the FSU rescues employees who get fired for wrong speech, the most persecuted contemporary heretics being gender-critical feminists. They get into trouble for saying that men aren't women. The efficiency of the FSU is such that free speech unions have now opened in South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia. Something is happening. The tide is turning. When I started documenting the counteroffensive to wokeism, there were already books covering the woke lunacy, but not so much reflecting on the heretics, those risking their career to unmask and contain this ideology. Wokeism is a complex nebula. I guess most people here know about it. It is the decolonized movement, critical race theory, neo-feminism, and transgenderism. Those four doctrines altogether make up wokeism. While for opposing this destructive ideology, the contrarians were called Nazis, racists, transphobes. It's not much of a seller, I grant you, but I thought it deserved a closer look. What's more, I thought this could inspire French contrarians. Regarding wokeism, everything that happens in the US soon happens in the UK to then reach continental Europe and Belgium, of course. Thus, watching what's unfolding in the Anglosphere was a way to figure out what was coming to France. And it did come to France. The British press, for some reason, often pictures President Macron as an opponent to wokeism. He is not. I'll give one example among many. Since January 2022, a French law forbids gender conversion therapy, meaning that if a psychologist tries to help a young girl to accept her feminine body, he now, in France, risks a hefty financial penalty and even a ban on practicing. Even the UK didn't go that far. Well, on the day the law passed, President Macron tweeted how proud France should be. Being yourself isn't a crime, he wrote, using the exact activist's lexicon. Being yourself meaning refusing your biological sex. So France isn't immune to wokeism. Nevertheless, defying geographical blatancy, wokeism crossed the Atlantic much quicker than it crossed the Channel. And this little delay provides three kinds of benefits. First, we now know how fast woke concepts can infiltrate a country and turn into a hegemonic bureaucratic power. Second, we now know how radical it can become. Who would have thought that wording the definition of a woman would become subversive? Who would have thought that universities would hold separate graduation ceremonies based on race or put in place black-only student dorms? Thirdly, we now have at hand the tools crafted across the Anglosphere by brainy people worried about saving Western values and institutions. So who are those people? At a time when no one really dared to speak out, Professor of Psychology Jordan Peterson questioned the intrusion of gender ideology into legislation. This was 8 years ago, around spring 2016. Peterson got into huge trouble and lost that battle. The terms gender expression and gender identity were added in the Canadian Human Rights Act as prohibited grounds of discrimination, whatever it means, and probably no one really knows what it means, gender expression, even those who craft the laws. Peterson was defeated but didn't surrender. His determination inspired a multitude of people around the world. His book sold by millions, and last autumn, ARC, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, a 3-day conference held in London, attracted 1,500 leaders, world leaders, politicians, top executives, and scientists from 72 countries joined forces around Peterson with the aim to change the narrative of victimhood and decline and secure liberal democracy's freedoms. In February 2017, Dave Rubin, host of the Rubin Report, published a video on the conservative channel PragerU entitled "Why I Left the Left," in which he distanced himself from wokeism. The 5-minute video got 16 million views. People like Dave Rubin, Douglas Murray, Ben Shapiro, Claire Lehman, founder of the Australian magazine Quillette, and of course Spiked magazine, of which some people are around here, all those people contributed to reopen the debate, and it is certainly easier to declare yourself anti-woke in 2024 than it was 7 or 8 years ago. Well done. White privilege, rape culture, gender affirmation, How on earth could those fallacious notions overwhelm our vocabulary at every level? The words not only spring up in the bureaucratic literature of the UN and the EU, but they also permeate into our private lives when, for example, out of the blue, your niece declares herself non-binary. Those concepts, they first emerge within social science departments, within universities. Once endorsed by peer-reviewed journals, the mainstream media swallowed them, whereupon suddenly, one evening, around the dinner table, your niece declares herself non-binary. This is the path through which woke ideas spread into culture. Three intellectuals, James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose, decided to derail this process and debunk the intellectual foundations of identity politics. The trio wrote 20 papers of academic caliber and sent them to journals in the field of woke studies as varied as fat studies or feminist geography. The first paper, entitled "The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct," this was the first paper, it argued that penises are responsible for climate change. All papers were completely senseless and farcical, but skillfully peppered with postmodern jargon. As a result, 7 papers were published after peer review. The hoax worked beyond expectations, and it showed that woke studies don't hold themselves to the standards of rigorous academic scholarship. Okay. After identifying and then debunking, the counteroffensive reached its third sequence, confronting wokeism. There comes Christopher Rufo, who likes to present himself as a conservative activist. He is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. His book, America's Cultural Revolution, How the Radical Left Conquered Everything. So his book received the 2024 Conservative Book of the Year award. Since 2020, Rufo reported how critical race theory pervaded the US federal government from the Treasury all the way through the FBI, and how a new segregation was slowly embedding itself in public bodies, schools, and corporations. Rufo managed to turn wokeism into a political issue. His strategy against critical race theory was then applied to transgender ideology. And as a result, tens of American states have now passed legislation regulating the way anti-racism or trans ideology is taught in schools, as well as laws regarding so-called gender-affirming medicine. I discovered that the missing link to so many political problems was not knowledge, but action, says Rufo. Rufo aims to win back American institutions. Others would rather build new ones. Historian Neil Ferguson believes that the major American universities are now simply unsalvageable. Why? Because they're soaked with woke ideology at every level. Neil Ferguson is among the founders of the new University of Austin in Texas, an institution dedicated to free thought and critical thinking, and the first cohort of bachelor students will arrive this fall. So this is another good news. In the UK, a month ago, political analyst Eric Kaufman, or Kaufman, however you pronounce it, inaugurated the Center for Heterodox Social Science as an escape from the left-wing monoculture in British academy. Historian Neil Ferguson was present at the launch of this new research center. In his speech, he stressed that British universities are 10 years behind the US in terms of wokery, meaning it is still time to stop the process. Well, the same reasoning applies to France. Yes, DEI departments have flourished in French academy, but scholars have an eye on the Anglo-Saxon counteroffensive. L'Observatoire des idéologies identitaires is doing a fantastic job in documenting and confronting woke activism. Worth mentioning their latest symposium, Union européenne, pression identitaire. It was fascinating to hear about the astronomic grants awarded by the EU to ideologically motivated research projects. And there lies the fourth and probably most decisive sequence of the counteroffensive. We know that wokeism conquers nations via supranational channels. NGOs do lobby the UN as well as the EU. That is exactly how the obscure notion of gender came to replace sex in official documents around the Western world. The same process is at play with the brand new report on European historical consciousness. This report is asking member states to, I quote, update their historical curriculums. The report reduces European history to crimes, sexism, and racism. It favors European identity over national identity. It calls for an, I quote again, an intersectional history teaching. In short, the report is a model of repentance, wokeism, and pedagogism, and this new look of history teaching is due to be put in place in all member states. The supranational level is where it all started. It is where it must end. The battle needs to occur within supranational organizations. One of those happens to be here in Brussels, and elections will be held in June, a good opportunity to vote anti-woke. And that is how the international anti-woke will save nationhood. Christopher Rufo calls for a counter-revolution. As a conclusion, I will quote him on how he sees the outcome of that counter-revolution. Quote, "The common citizen will have the space for inhabiting and passing down his own virtues and sentiments and beliefs, free from the imposition of values from above." Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists.